All right. We are live. Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. Today is June 20th, and you're hanging out with my community manager, the community built by, for, and managed by community managers. As always, you can chat along with our Twitter chat at #CMGR Hangout, where some of you are watching. If you love what you're seeing today and have a great idea for a topic or want to join us live any day, really, just hit us up over at mycmgr.com, our website, and click on Participate. So according to Les McKeown, who is with us today, the real secret of leadership is that it happens all the time, almost anywhere you look, and it's frankly not that difficult. That's so true. There's often confusion over what leadership is, whether it's defined as only the hero in an epic plot or someone who is permanently overscheduled and overworked. So then, what exactly does real-world leadership look like? It's a topic that Les addresses in his third book, Do Lead, and our topic for today. So big shout out to Carrie Keenan and Sarah over on Twitter who are helping us out today. As always, on our Twitter chat, we can't do this without you. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sherry and let everybody introduce themselves.
Awesome. Hey everyone, I'm Sherry Rohde and I co-produce this chat along with Brew, as well as lead community and user experience for a company called Rebellion Media. And I'll jump back in at the end to pre-intro Les as well. But go ahead, Brian.
How's it going? Brian Fanzo, iSocialFans on Twitter. Currently exploring the wonderful world of interviewing and looking for my next adventure, but happy to be here. Love talking kind of leadership and really what it means today, and excited to kind of hear Les's insights, especially as someone I've been reading and following along for a while, so glad to be here.
Ayala.
Hi, I'm Ayala Barron. I fired myself from corporate America about 18 months ago, and doing a lot of work around creating healthy organizations. I also have a startup with Tim McDonald looking at how do we reimagine leadership called Creating Is, where we're looking for people who are bold and innovative and humble and are making great results in a post-hero society. So I'm really excited to be here and to learn and listen from this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to say I have read Les's books, Predictable Success, his first one that talks about the life cycle of a business, as well as The Synergist, which is about the 4 personalities in the workplace. And so I was really excited for his third book. You can ask him. I kept bothering him as to when it was going to be done. So when I read the first chapter, I was super excited to have him talk about this aspect of leadership that's not necessarily what gets promoted a lot, but definitely the truth. So we actually got to meet in person 2 years ago, so I'm excited. Les, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks, Sherry. Yes, Les McKeown. I have a really pronounced accent. I'm from Ireland, and although I moved here to the US 20 years ago, my accent has decided not to relocate. So this is not Gaelic, it's just strangulated English. I was, real quickly, originally a CPA, long time ago. Got into starting businesses, the first third of my career, started 42 businesses by the time I was 35, got burnt out from doing that, so started to teach other people how to grow their businesses, and spent about 12 years building a incubation consulting firm that did that worldwide, helped literally hundreds upon hundreds of businesses get launched and grow. And moved here to the US, like I said, about 20 years ago to really tease out the end of the model that Sherry referred to in my first book, Predictable Success, and to consult and coach with leaders in organizations of all sorts, for-profit, not-for-profit. And I've been doing that happily since then, and I'm about 172 years of age.
Haha, I doubt that. Awesome. Well, I wanted to jump in, and we'll probably have you start out, Les, answering each of these, and then we'll kind of follow up from there and have a great discussion. So,
sure.
So our first question is, what are common misconceptions about leadership?
So the reason I wrote, this is the book that we've been talking about, Do Lead, which is the third book that in the series that I released came out about 3 weeks ago. And the reason I wrote it is that in all of the work that I've done over the last 30 years or so, one of the most common issues that I've come up against over and over and over again is that organizations stall out because of a misinterpretation or a misunderstanding of what leadership is. And let me just summarize that from a 30,000 foot level. About 22 years ago, we started to get into the 24/7 news cycle. It really got birthed in the first Iraq War when CNN became known worldwide, but the process was underway long before that. And one of the things that happens with the 24/7 news cycle is we've got to fill all that time, and now we've got to fill web page after web page and get hit after hit. And anything that battles its way through on the 24/7 news cycle has got to be something that people want to see. We're seeing that with clickbait in articles these days. You know, titles have nothing to do with what's actually in the article. And what it's done to leadership is it has really promoted the idea of heroic leadership as being what leadership is. And so we hear a lot about stories like, you remember Captain Sully landed the boat in the Hudson about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. You know, that's a fantastic story. Wonderful arc, great heroic event. And it's great, and he's a great man. But we hear that type of story over and over again. And there's nothing wrong with it. I love heroic leadership. I blub at the slightest hint of a good story about somebody doing something magnificent. And I get to see it up close in business all the time. I know a lot of heroic leaders in business. The problem is this. When individuals join an organization, they're coming already with that subliminal notion that leadership is something heroic. It's something that happens from in front. It's done by people with a title. It's done by people who have got an established position as leaders. So that's happening back in our subconscious. And then we arrive in an organization, something else happens. First of all, your light falls down onto the floor and it goes dark on one side. That's what the noise is that you just heard. Here's what happens whenever we join an organization. Nobody in organizations gets together and has conversations that go something like this. Hey, what does leadership mean here? I mean, if somebody came up to you and asked you that, you'd look at them like, you're just crazy. You're talking like something out of a book. Stop that. Let's talk about what we're going to have for lunch. We pick up what leadership is in all sorts of osmotic ways. We just listen to what people talk about. We see what gets rewarded. We look at what people like to see happen. And you know what gets referred to over and over again? The myths and legends of the organization backing its glory days. You ever sit around and have people talk about things like, oh, do you remember the time when? Do you remember the moment when? And what we're doing is we're rehashing the heroic leadership that our own organization or group or project team or department went through. And what that does is it emphasizes this whole concept of heroic leadership. So this long preamble, I promise not to rant on like this with every one of the questions, but it's an important foundational piece here for what we're going to talk about. The reason I wrote the book is that I spent a lot of time trying to help people in organizations break apart this misperception that only heroic leadership is leadership, that you have to have a title, that you have to be in front, that you have to do something dramatic. None of that has to be the case. It's a really nice subset of leadership, but leadership is something much, much bigger than just heroic leadership. I'm exhausted now. I'm done.
No, that was great. I'm glad that you gave some background on it because I think it definitely sets the feel for today's topic, so it was perfect. Ayala, Brian, Drew?
I think one of the things that strikes me, you know, a lot of times, I mean, at least in the past, my view of leadership was always like, when I thought of a leader, I just thought of somebody on top, somebody in power, you know, and that's all you kind of thought, like someone who is ready to lead, who is just out in front, and you have to, you know, you have to listen to, kind of like that kind of this older model. So that's definitely a misconception that in the past I've had.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, sorry, Alan, if I could just pick up on what you mentioned there, Brian, the idea that leadership is something where we're either in the role of following or being a leader, that it's a binary issue, that you're one or the other, is, again, one of those misperceptions that we need to keep aware of. In fact, leadership can be a temporary, interim, intermittent event. It doesn't have to be something that you are all the time. It can be something that you are when it's necessary. And if we have time a little later, I'll share a couple of specific examples of people I know who don't want to be that leader in front, but they do conduct what I call not so random acts of leadership. And, that's the essence of having a healthy organization, is allowing people to conduct not so random acts of leadership. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was going to say I love what you're saying, because I think it really resonates. I think we're faced today with one of the biggest leadership crises we have. And when I ask people, who are the top 3 leaders in the world, most people either mention people who are dead or superheroes, and those don't count. And when you look around and you say, well, who are the top 3 leaders in education? Who are the top 3 leaders in business? Who are the top 3 leaders in government, healthcare, whatever the list? We know the celebrity culture, but we don't really know who those people are. And so we have this huge crisis, and yet at the same time, everybody can be a leader. And I think we need to, what I'm excited about what you're saying and what you're contributing is, can we redefine what leadership means and move out of this hero kind of world to say, did you reach out to someone today and have a conversation, or did you think like bigger than yourself in a way that helps someone else? And so this whole conversation about what is leadership and in the 21st century, and how do we get rid of the 20th century and even the 19th century to go back to basics about humanity, because I think that's the big thing that's missing. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think you used a crucially important, if incredibly boring word right in the middle of that, Alec, which is the word define. How do we define leadership? And the reality is that we typically don't. We just try to pick it up as we go along. There's some organizations that make a thing of leadership development. In fact, a lot of very large organizations make a thing of leadership development. But what they're doing typically, and we're involved in this, my company helps build leadership development programs, but typically what they are usually doing is supporting the structure of leadership being something that comes from the top of group of people, the senior executives in an organization. You talk about who are the leadership here, you normally find people pointing to folks that are at the top of the org chart, which is fine. I mean, if we're doing something right, people who are at the top of an org chart should be leaders, but not all of the leaders in an organization. A good client of mine, a company called A Motley Fool, investment advisors, you may have heard of them. If you walk into Motley Fool and ask, who are the top leaders you have here, they'd say, well, what project are you talking about? What day of the week is it? Which part of our organization do you want to refer that to? Because they have got leadership throughout the whole organization. And it comes down to this question of defining it. What we do in most organizations, and I mean any group of 2 or more people, this isn't just for-profit businesses, it happens in not-for-profit businesses, it happens in our soccer leagues, it happens in our book clubs. What happens in most organizations is the concept of leadership is left as something that we sort of work out. If you want to build strong leadership deep throughout the organization, you've got to specifically define it so people aren't having to make it up as they go along. Because as we've already established, if we leave people to make it up as they go along, they quite naturally do what we would all do, which is bring what they've learned from all of the other media and interactions that they have. And here's how I suggest, I've been carving and shaping and working at this for 30 years, and the definition that works best, in my experience, is to define leadership as follows. It's any act that gets a group of 2 or more people closer to their common goals. Any act that gets 2 or more people closer to their common goals is an act of leadership. And let me give you a quick example, and maybe we can tease this out a little bit more. I live disturbingly close to a Starbucks. I'm pointing at it right now. It's just across the road from my home office, so I spend way too long in there. And one of the baristas in there, a great guy, loves the bus tables. It's his favorite thing to do because he gets to talk to people, all that sort of stuff. Now, Justin will do that, yet when I'm in there and I see a big queue form, he's the first to look up, see that this has happened without anybody telling him. He'll jump around the back of the machines and he'll help whoever on the beverage making facilities get rid of the queue. Nobody tells him to do that. He does not want to be the manager of that outlet. let alone be hard shows. He does not want to be a leader, but he will conduct not so random acts of leadership in order that his group, his team, his crew can get closer to their common goals, which is to finish out their shift happy, satisfied, and with happy, satisfied customers. And by explicitly defining leadership that way, that it's any act that gets two or more people closer to their common goals, I think then we begin to unpick this idea of leadership as being something only for people who've got a title or a position. You said whenever you said define, defining is very important. Sorry.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think for me, I played college hockey, and I always was one of the things that we were told was, the guys who wore the C on their chest or the A on their chest were the leaders, and it was something kind of misconception because the most senior guys in the team kind of got the C or the A, and years later I kind of went back and would talk to some people, and they would say, well, Brian, you were the leader of the team for all 4 years, and I said, well, I only had the assistant captain my senior year, and they're like, well, that didn't give you no title, no thing, that didn't give you the leadership. We were led by you because of what you were doing, and I think that the sports angle is interesting. I coach a high school hockey team, and I don't give captains, assistant captains until halfway through the year, and because I believe the leaders will kind of come to the front, and I've had freshmen and sophomores that get those letters on their chest, and it means something in hockey a little bit different, but it also shows that leadership doesn't have title. I love that example because I think too often I'm guilty of it. I remember I was very lucky. I had my first job out of college. Someone hired me, and within 2 years he was actually working for me, the person that hired me. And later on, I didn't really realize at the time that he was leading by letting me go to the front. And through 5 years of me working with him, he wasn't my manager anymore, but he came on my team and was leading me through all 5 years. I'm still indebted to that leadership, and it had nothing to do with him being my manager, and then he had to work for me. And so it's not title. I think that's, people kind of throw the word millennial around, and I always say it's a state of mind. It's not really as much a year you were born. And for me, it's about people that are willing to take charge or even empower somebody else. I threw a quote up on Twitter because John Maxwell talks about it's because the ability to empower others, and I think it's exactly like you were saying, Les. It's those random acts of people. Too often people assume leadership means you have a manager, a director, a VP, or you even have people work for you. I joke that my 4-year-old daughter, she led me to chop off my goatee this morning. Leadership comes in many different forms.
Well, we've all been led. Those of us who've got kids, we've all been led by our kids on occasions. Mine's now 30 years of age and he's wandering around in the office here. He leads our business, so eventually they learn it and they can use it. But I want to pick up on your coaching sports analogy for a second, Brian, because I think there's something that you mentioned in there that's really important. So I've been positioning leadership as something that's not just, I'm not throwing it out, but it's not just heroic leadership, and it's not just for people who've got a title like the folks with the A or the C or whatever. That by defining leadership as any act that gets two or more people closer to their common goals, we see that it works for organizations, departments, divisions, projects, teams, sports teams, whatever. And the key to that is that it empowers people, to use a word that's really been drained of value, but it's still the right word. It empowers people to undertake these not so random acts of leadership. But that implies one other thing which is very important, and that comes out quite clearly if you continue your sports analogy. It's got to go hand in hand with a strong sense of alignment in the organization. And this is where you as community managers, know this, that if you don't have an aligned community, if you don't have an aligned organization, we get people then committing random acts of leadership, which is not that helpful. We want not so random. We want that actual leadership to be taking us towards a common goal. So, for example, if we have a group, and I'm European, I'm from Ireland, so we know about football. Sorry, what do you call it? Soccer. I'm only teasing. But if you watch a number of international teams, you'll see people who will try to take individual leadership, but because they're not aligned as a team, they end up being a bunch of divas who aren't delivering anything. And on the other front, if you've ever watched a group of 6-year-olds play soccer, it's like flockball, right? There's just this one little hive, and they're all going around. There's this dust bowl being charged up behind them. What the two tracks that a really successful an organization is successful in the long term runs on is a definition of leadership that allows people to commit not so random acts of leadership, but on the other hand, a really strong sense of alignment so that those acts do add up to more than just the individual acts themselves. And I'll finish with this point. One of the things that can go wrong is we've probably all met people who conduct constant random acts of leadership, and they're actually a pain in the ass. You know, they're doing it, you know, to either get some glory or just make themselves feel good, but they're not taking us closer to where we want to go as a group or a team. They're just being a pain in the butt. And so I promote heavily in the book the phrase not so random acts of leadership, because I think it's very important that they do add up to taking us closer to our common goals.
Yeah, I think it's important. The sports analogy, I was not a real soccer fan, but I love the World Cup, and I was actually talking to someone about this yesterday, because to me, you know, oftentimes we always assume a coach is the leader, but soccer is a great sport that the coach really only gets to interact at halftime and before the game, and that means that the team has to be leaders, and you're only the good of the sum of 11 people. And I work in the social business aspect, so I implement social business tools in internal communities. And one of the things language that I changed is they always said you needed leadership buy-in. And I kind of correct them. I say, no, you need management buy-in, and then you need leaders to emerge from the community, because the leadership buy-in is always assumed, oh, well, if it's leadership buy-in, that means the CEO has to buy in. Well, I don't consider him a leader in social business unless he actually takes that role. So right. I can flip the term, and it's, you get management buy-in, and then if you have a CEO that's great in your community, then he's the leader that's the buy-in that you really need.
Love it.
So you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but let's go ahead and jump into question 2, which is, what does a real-world leader look like?
One of the things that I mention in the book is that the idea, the painted picture, if you will, of a leader has become so complex over the last couple of decades as to become almost unattainable for most of us. So you go to the library or bookstore and go to the leadership section and start pulling these books down. If you were to begin to list all the skills and talents and attitudes and attributes you're supposed to have to be leaders, none of us would ever come up to. So something I've been working at for decades now is to pare down what is at the core of leadership. And we've already seen one major plank, which is at the core it's somebody who will commit acts that gets us as a group or team closer to our common goals. But on the other side, I show the really mundane, if you'll allow me to bore you for just a moment or two, the really mundane core of what a leader looks and sounds like. And it's this, it falls into 2 groups, one of which only recently emerged. One of the things that you can tell in a leader is that they've got good conflict management skills, they can have difficult conversations, they're reasonably good communicators, and they're inclusive. In other words, they work well with other people. And most leaders aren't Zen masters at that, and you don't need to be a world master at difficult conversations, conflict management, communication skills. You do not have to be able to, stand up on a platform and talk to 1,500 people, but you do need basic skills, and that's really it. You need to basically be able to handle conflict, have difficult conversations with people, communicate well orally, in writing, good body language, reasonably good control of body language, and you need to be inclusive. It doesn't work if you play favorites with people. So that's one part, one sort of leg of what a leader looks like. And there's one other aspect that's become very important in my experience over the last number of years, and it's emerged in Do Lead. Actually, I talk about it a little bit in the Synergist, the second book as well, because it's just become an imperative. It's like a hygiene factor, and it's this. I see a lot of people who should be really good leaders. They've got all of the other attributes and skills, but they just can't be because they're overwhelmed. They're just too overwhelmed. And I see folks come into, leadership happens in groups and teams, right? It's hard to just sit in a room and lead yourself. You've got to have a group or a team. Now, it could be virtual like this, or it could be real world, but it happens in groups and teams. I see people arrive in meetings, virtual and real world meetings all the time, that I know could be really good leaders. They could commit one or more not so random acts of leadership that would help us get a little further forward. But you know what they're doing? They're thumbing under the table trying to catch up with their messages or their texts. Or they're so swamped with work that they've brought a laptop and they're going to sit there hammering away at it for the next 10 minutes instead of engaged. And so one of the things that I show in the book is that one of the sets of attributes for a real leader is that they've got basic time management skills. They know how to manage priorities reasonably well. I mean, again, they're not Zen masters, but they're pretty well on top of that. And that they know how to act when a crisis happens. Again, they don't need to be heroes, but it doesn't throw them off. And one of the reasons why that group of skills is in there is because, as we heard a little bit earlier, we have a dearth of good leaders these days, and one of the reasons for that, there's a number of reasons, a lot of which revolve around the role models that we see, particularly in entertainment and politics, and we might talk about that later. But the other main reason that we have a dearth of leaders is people are just far too freaking swamped. They can't do it. They can't consistently step up to taking not so random acts of leadership because they're so overwhelmed with all of the stuff that's coming at them. And it's one of our core teachings in Do Lead is that you don't have to become a GTD black belt, but if you're going to be a leader, you've got to be able to focus, you've got to be able to engage, you've got to be able to be there. And that means having basic time management, basic productivity management, basic crisis management skills. So that's, to me, what a leader looks like these days. Somebody who's reasonably in charge of their own environment so they can show up, and who's got basic interpersonal skills. That's it. That's all you need. Everything else is situational. You don't need to wear your underpants outside your trousers. You know, you don't have to be a superhero, dead or alive. As long as you're pretty much in charge of your own information flows and you can communicate reasonably well, you've got what it takes to be a leader.
And just to add, I love how you're talking about just having time to lead, and I think that for me, I also look at it like you have to be if you're not in a position to delegate, you have to have that skill set of kind of bringing the team in for help, right? Because I think that in all positions, companies or organizations or groups of people, no one would say like, yes, we just want one person to bear all this weight, and a lot of times, good leaders will realize I need help and be able to ask for help and have that a little bit of that vulnerability.
Yeah, I love that point about delegation, Brew. Here's one of the important things that it teases out. We go back to the old model of leadership, and we look at, for example, those leadership development programs that we talked about. And again, I'm not exempting myself from this. David, who's across the room from me here, and I work on building leadership development programs all the time. But what often happens is you, again, get this misconception of leadership that it's only for people who have got somebody who they can delegate, quotes, the crud to, so that we can do heroic leadery things, right? So what about everybody else in the organization? What about Justin the barista? You can't turn to somebody and say, hey, buddy, go make the coffee. He's the guy, right? So that's why I emphasize the need to have basic personal management abilities. Just being on top of your incoming and outgoing communications, right? Whether or not you've got somebody to delegate to. You don't have to do this, but if you want to lead even intermittently, if you want to be able to commit not so random acts of leadership, you owe it to yourself and everybody else that you're at least not perpetually distracted by the fact that you're screwed up on your own time and productivity management. You just got to have enough basic skills. It's essentially a hygiene factor these days that you're walking into environments being able to be engaged. So I take your point about delegation is really important, and it's equally important, I think, to realize that we can build organizations where even those folks who are right in the front line don't have anybody to delegate to can step up and commit not so random acts of leadership.
So I just wanted to jump here and add on something that Brian talked about before, because I think there's this great opportunity today. I'm working with one of my clients on working out loud, and she's a phenomenal leader. She's taken the feedback and the fear of sharing what's going on in her world, and a lot of courage, I think, is something we don't talk about when it talks about leadership, because that's a big piece of it. And I think that in the virtual and face-to-face, because I think they have to interact. You can't just go to social as a platform. You need to have a holistic system of how you operate. But when you start taking things online and working out loud as a leader, there are huge shifts that take place in the whole organization, because you've got more transparency, you have the leader being able to be out there, not just rely on the community, but they're revealing parts of themselves and their strategy that allow people to align better on purpose. And you know, one of the things that's really encouraging right now is, as organizations learn how to integrate these platforms into their business and not necessarily lead with them, there's a huge opportunity there to create more dialogue and conversations. And one of the shifts that I'm seeing is that a 20th century organization has meetings, a 21st century organization has conversations. And I think true leaders are the ones having conversations that have meaning and purpose, so people can understand, why am I here and what work means. So there's just a whole other element of leadership that connects the, you know, if you're under 21, you don't understand the difference between online and offline, but kind of creates that connection that I think is a huge opportunity for leaders, especially in large decentralized companies that are global, to have better conversations.
I think that's a great point, because and it's funny because the online offline world, I have a lot of people, when I was going through, one of my pet peeves was someone would say, I have an open door policy, and I would say, well, that's great, but why don't you come outside your door, right? Because open door policy means that someone's coming into you. A true leader is going to go, and one of the things that I kind of came up with, because time management was something I struggled with, was 3 days a week I had a announcement or a notification pop up on my calendar, and it was 1 hour, and I called it my say hello hour, and I would just walk around and find people to say hello to, and it was not me leading, it was me engaging with others, because I felt like as someone that I wanted to know what other people were doing, I work with these people, I want to care, and part of that goes with online, because some people, I'll hear, Brian, how do you stay in touch, or how do you engage online? And really, if you care, if you're a leader and you want to engage, you're going to make the time. Saying you're busy is an excuse. And I think what I do is I put on my, I use a couple different tools. I put on my list, make sure I check in with this person, and it's not getting anything from me in return, but it's building those relationships, and and even it's kind of reminding you that it's important to, even if you're online, it's important to reach out to people that aren't necessarily in your news feed, because there's so much noise, and just because they're not being standing out from the noise doesn't mean that they're not worth engaging.
Love that, and I think it links quite well with a couple of the points that Alec mentioned, specifically around the issue of courage. I do want to make the point that I wrote Do Lead for folks that don't need any help with courage. That's got to be a condition to leadership. Is that not that I don't mean by that these are people who are fearless. What I mean by that is that courage for most people in most organizations is courage not to do something dramatic and remarkable, but to merely be vulnerable and help try to get their group closer to their common goals. The courage just to say something, just to say, well, should we try this? Or the courage for some people not to say anything. I mean, some people, they talk to avoid having to think too much about something. And maybe the courage that needs to be shown is just to be quiet and say, you know what, I have nothing to say on this particular topic. Let's just move on, rather than feel you've got to contribute every time, because you're slowing the whole thing up in the organization. And so the idea of courage as something heroic takes us back to that notion of heroic leadership. I haven't written the book for folks who want to commit acts of heroic leadership. They're going to be fine. People who want to do that, there's plenty of resources out there. I've written Do Lead for people who just want to help, not necessarily all the time, get their groups, teams, divisions, departments, projects closer to their common goals. And for them, the courage is often just a small thing. Just contribute, share something, suggest something, deflect something. And it's all of those unhooked leaders, those folks who haven't moved out even just a little bit, that I really wrote the book for. And I want to say one other thing, and I'm in dangerous territory here, and I realize I could be calling down a drone strike from every one of you. I just want to talk about something that I think that social media has done to the perception of leadership here. You go back to the days when I was a kid, before we invented motor cars and electricity, people who were very well known, even big in entertainment. That's, to be realistic, probably back in my youth, Rolling Stones, Beatles, U2, all that sort of stuff. Massive following, but it's a quiet following. The only way the following gets exhibited or gets experienced is lots of people buy things called LPs, plastic flat discs that music was on. These days, folks who are in those positions have followings that say stuff. We have no shortage of conversations going on. And I want to go back to, I'm sharing this because I want to go back to Evan's point about 20th century organizations at meetings, 21st century organizations at conversations. I'm going to be honest with you. I wish most people would shut them up. We have way, way too much crud that's polluting all of our ability to actually do stuff that counts. Now, I'm not going back to the old discussion about, Twitter's a waste of time because I don't want to hear about what people had for lunch. I don't mean that. What I mean is this. If you're, and I'm not going to pick an individual because I'll get sued, but if you're a hip-hop star and you've got 1.3 million people on your social media footprint, you can have 1.3 million conversations if you want. You can tweet 50, 60, 70 times a day, 700 times a day if you want, and have all of those interactions. Here's the question: if we're talking about leadership, did it help any group get closer to their common goals, or are you just selling more merch? Right? A community, a true organization is getting somewhere. 20th century organizations, and 21st century organizations, and 22nd century organizations, any organization that counts achieves something, does something, gets something, somebody, some group closer to some common goal. And that's what I'm passionate about, is that not just do we have conversations. I take a point out of it. I love to go into those businesses where you can see that there's rich, engaged discussion and dialogue. But the key question is this: is it getting us closer to our common goals or not? And sadly, I see a lot of organizations where there's a lot of real fun talk and just nothing's happening as a result of it. And I think we've got to be careful about promoting the idea that simply discussing will get us somewhere. Leadership means getting us closer to. I'll finish this rant with one point. I say in the book that one of the biggest misconceptions about leadership is that it's about people. Leadership is nothing to do with people at a primary level. It's about achieving things. It's about doing something. It's about crossing the Red Sea, curing cancer, or making a really good bottle that you can drink water out of and it stays full. It's about achieving things. We do that through people, but it's not about people in and of itself. So, end of old guy curmudgeon rant.
Well, we're actually not that far away, Les, because
no, I don't think we are. I just wanted to put a spin on that.
So there's not going to be a drone strike from San Francisco today, but I do think that we've lost the plot. We've got the Google monster, we've got the Outlook monster, we've got people becoming tourists in meetings, and people saying that they don't have time to do things. And so we've lost the basic common sense when it comes to business about what business are we in, and how do we get the people that we hire, because we hire the best and the brightest to achieve that, and the leaders to help show the way. Right. The problem that we have today is that we're using 20th century practices in terms of a lot of the social tools, in terms of having people yell at each other and not listen. The tools are really there when you know how to use them, when you know how to build community, when you know how to tap into them as a business enabler. You build relationships, and strong relationships that then enable both internally and externally of your organization to meet that purpose, whether it's water or curing cancer or whatever it is. And you need the leaders to step up at all levels to do that. And we do have to have more conversations where we're listening. I'm not talking about consensus. I'm talking about the fact that a 20th century organization has in their communication plan audiences, and the only time you have an audience is when you go see a movie or you go to the theater. What you need to have is two-way communication in a 21st century organization where you're actually stopping to listen and engaging and having those powerful conversations that lead you somewhere. And so I do think I would challenge you. I do think that it's about people in the way that you have to get back to humanity and you have to get back to purpose. But you have to start listening and having more in-depth conversations to get there.
I think that's a good point. And I'll come in from the social aspect that I'll have a lot of people that ask me, what tools do I use to manage social? And almost every time I talk about building relationships, talking and communicating, and most of what I use tools for is so that I can listen in many different channels and then reach out and be human and create those relationships. And I think the mistake becomes when we either use technology as a crutch, or we blame technology for the reason that we're not being able to do something. And even last night we were having just a debate on, has technology ruined our kids and how do kids engage? And I made the argument that my dad traveled every single week when I grew up, and I travel a lot for my work, but because of video chat and text pictures, I'm able to engage and communicate with my kids like he wasn't able to before with me. But it's because I make the time to do that. And I think it's a great point. It is about, it's that combination where we need to remember why we're doing things, and I couldn't agree more that there's way too much noise out there. I always say that if I can find more ways to filter the noise and really just get the people that are saying stuff of value, then it matters. Because leaders within a company, I always laugh because no one has the title leader on their plaque or on their door. And whenever we have like a community manager, your community manager, you can ask them, who's the leader in your community, and I promise it's not because they're the most active or the most, the person that's out there the most. It's because they care. I think I use the hashtag #ShowYouCare, and I hit, people were asking how I got followers, and that's because I care. I think if we had more people that just showed they cared and explained how and why they cared, then we can make a difference.
I'm 100% in agreement with that, and I got to make something clear. I love the technology. I've never been more excited for the range of tools that we have. I'm not technophobic, and I'm not against the progress in what we have. What frustrates me, I mean, let's face it, I remember I bought one of the first Motorola bricks that was a phone that you had to hold with two hands. I remember the first fax machine being installed in an office. I mean, fax machine. So I'm not against the technology at all. I love it. What frustrates me is, I mean, to put it in a soundbite, we just got to get over it. I mean, let's just get back to focusing on what it is we're here to do, what we're going to achieve, and the right vehicles to do it will sort themselves out. I get frustrated when I hear people twist the vehicle into the thing, and we're talking about leadership on a per platform basis. That just doesn't interest me. I'm interested in, what are you here to do? Let's concentrate on that, and the right vehicle to do it will soon sort itself out.
Well, and I think when you talk about like all of the noise and engagements, we've talked about that a lot whenever ROI comes up, which is a super hot topic for a group of Neverends as well. But we've talked about how like engagement by itself is kind of overrated, and about how everything that you do needs to be tied back to business objectives. So when you're working towards that goal, like that applies towards community as well. Like, what is your goal as a community, as an organization? What are you trying to hit? Is it just throwing like 100 comments out there per day, or is it to try to increase page views, or to try to increase sales, or what is it that you're looking towards?
You said leaders get us closer to a goal. So if you're going to be a leader, you need purpose. And so it's sort of like, don't say my purpose is this hammer, but my purpose is to build this, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a brilliantly put through. That you've heard the old story of the guy walking past three brickies, as we call them, back in the UK, and asking one of them, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm putting this brick on top of this brick." Asks the second one, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm putting this wall together." And asks the third one, "What are you doing?" "I'm building a magnificent cathedral." Well, that's, it's just a question. It's a cheesy story, but it's a question of different perspective. But yes, we can't do the act of leadership without a purpose to lead towards. Otherwise, we're just prodding people with electric rods and making them move, jump for no apparent reason. But I do talk in the book about something that I think has been equally over-egged in recent years, which is the issue of passion. This does not need passion. Passion's fine. I have no problem against it. I'm as all for passion in the right place as anyone else. But the concept of needing to be passionate to be a leader is a load of absolute hoking. It's very nice if and when it happens. I've been in circumstances where my need to lead and my passion have merged, and that's nice. But I gotta tell you, 94% of the stuff that I do every day to lead in my small world, there's not a lot of passion involved, but there is getting us towards a common purpose. And the final thing that I want to share as well that I talk about in the book, which again I don't think gets the airing that it should do, is it doesn't need to be your life's purpose. It's quite valid to just grab some other purpose for a while, for a year or two. You come out of college, you go work with a Peace Corps for a couple of years. It may not be what you're going to do for the rest of your days. And everybody says that's a really good thing to do. I really appreciate that. Then you go into the world of business and you join an organization, and the idea that you might find that as your purpose for a couple of years and be totally bought into it and then move on is thought of as somehow not being just right. Well, that's not the world as I see it. I see a lot of people in organizations who, on a discretionary basis, adopt the goals of the organization they're with as the purpose that they're going to wheel their leadership in behind. But that's not saying that that's what they're going to do forever. We're not all Nelson Mandela. We don't all have a life's goal. I mean, if we do, that's wonderful. If you have an overarching life goal that's really important to you, I'm not knocking that at all. But, frankly, the rest of us live in a world where we've got to find purpose today, this week, next month, next year. And we live in a world where that can be a portfolio of purposes, if the plural isn't purpose-I, that we swap in and out of over time. There's not a darn thing wrong with that. But there has been a bit of a drumbeat in recent years that somehow we've all got to find something that's going to change the world, shatter paradigms, and we're going to get, I just get tired. I mean, it's just, that's not the real world. I want to have people around me who are going to come in tomorrow when it's been raining and when it's been a sticky week from a cash flow point of view, and where we've got a customer on the phone who's a pain in the ass, and I want them to find purpose in what we're doing because it's important to me, and I want it to be important to them. And when I go work with other organizations, if I can't find it in myself to see what they're doing is important and to give some of my discretionary leadership into that, and frankly, I shouldn't be taking money from them. So there you go. That's another rant. How do you folks do this? Have you put something in my coffee?
I think it's that passion that you don't need to be a leader that you're running around right now.
I'm passionate about that. I'm really passionate that you don't need passion to be a leader.
No, that's awesome. And I think we've pretty much already covered 4 and 5 without really even officially getting to them. But question 3, I just want to jump back to that, is how do you know when to leave?
Well, that's a really good question, Sherry. I'm going to be a tiny bit technical here, if you'll forgive me, and then we can back out of it if it's not helpful. One of the things that I see with folks who want to lead and don't necessarily want to become leaders but want to commit not so random acts of leadership is that they are nervous. I mean, where do I put my foot? It's a bit like trying to, walk through a field of IEDs. I feel like if I stomp on the wrong thing, this could blow up on me really, really easily. And one of the things that I suggest for most folks is, first of all, to find out what your core leadership style is. And we don't have time to go into it in great detail, but and I don't want to talk inside ball because I know you've read The Synergist. But in the second book, The Synergist, I talk about the 4 leadership styles that every one of us turns up as. We're either visionaries, big picture, swing for the fences, risk takers, or we're operators, grind it out, get it done, get out of my way, let's just make it happen, let's go, 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 go. Or we're processors, we want to put systems and processes in place. We're very left brain, very systematized, very process oriented and risk averse. Or we're synergists, we love people, we want to make sure the team's getting together well, we like to see people really involved and stuff. And what I encourage folks to do is to get really comfortable with what your style is and then step out in that area rather than trying to do something heroic, back to that model again, by being somebody that we're not. So you're a visionary, start your leadership in brainstorming sessions. If you're an operator, start your leadership by just making stuff happen. If you're a processor, start your leadership, acts of not so random leadership, by helping put the systems and processes in behind what other people are doing. If you're a synergist, then start your not so random acts of leadership in getting your team co-aligned and motivated. So find your style, and just as a freebie to the folks who'll be tuning in the class later, you can go to synergistquiz.com, it's all one word, synergistquiz.com. It's a free multi-choice assessment. It takes about 7 or 8 minutes to fill out, and it'll give you a sense of whether you're a visionary, operator, processor, or synergist, and help you get a sense of where you can begin to show those not so random acts of leadership. What I see all the time is when visionaries step out into the processor world, or processors turn up trying to be visionaries, that's when stuff gets gnarly. And you can do that, but if this is your first rodeo in terms of really trying to push your leadership skills, find out where you're most likely to have success and work in that style. Not to categorize people and say you can't break out of that, but you want to maximize success early on and not screw up. So find your style and work within that.
No, I think that's good. I think, in the social world we talk about give, 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 and that's something that a lot of people kind of resonate with. And I argue when you give, 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 and you start to realize that your giving is helping, it's a great step to you to realize you can start leading in that area. Because a lot of times I'm as guilty as it. I was chasing my purpose for a long while, and a lot of people are passionate and really love what they're doing, but it doesn't mean that if you love what you're doing, that's what your passion is for the rest of life. And I preach about embracing change, because the only thing we know that keeps happening is change. And if you can figure out what, if you keep giving, and then the more people that are accepting what you're giving kind of jump on that and help others, I mean, it really comes down to that fundamental example. And I love the idea that when you figure out the type of leader you are, it's a welcoming experience, because then you can kind of jump on that and kind of take the next steps. I'm gonna jump on that quiz. I'm curious to see what mine turns out for sure.
Yeah, what it'll show you is that most of us turn up with one primary style, but most of us have the ability to dip into at least one of the other styles from time to time. So I'm a visionary processor, not VP, and what that means is that if I'm beginning to work with a group, I know that I'm going to be strongest in helping them with the visionary side of things, and that's where I'm going to get more credibility quicker. I'm going to get more acceptance quicker. I'm going to feel more comfortable with what I'm suggesting, because that's my strong suit. And if I hear something on the processor side, I know I can keep in there relatively well and play my own part. But I know to not get too excited about jumping in when we're talking about operator-related stuff or synergy stuff, because that's not my strong suit. And the other thing I just want to add in to complete the answer to Sherry's question, which is knowing where you want to start. I share in the book, you gotta know where and when to commit your not so random acts of leadership, so that you're not stepping on other folks and you're not misaligning the organization by taking folks off in the wrong direction. So I talk about 4 places to look for. I talk about vacuums, blockages, on-ramps, and off-ramps. And essentially, vacuums are, what you might think, where there's something missing that we've got to fill. That's a good place to think, well, can I help you? Blockages are where there's already something there that we've got to get rid of. And as you might gather, operators tend to be really good at that. Visionaries tend to be good at the vacuums and coming up with stuff to fill a vacuum. Operators are good at getting rid of barriers. On-ramps and off-ramps are simply, what are we doing that we should do more of, or what are we doing that we should do less of? And processors tend to think well in that regard, iterating what we've already got, or reducing something that we're already doing to get a better return on investment. So look for vacuums, blockages, on-ramps, and off-ramps. Know your style so that you can feel comfortable with what you're going to do, and then look for something where you're going to genuinely help people, and that's where the vacuums, blockages, on-ramps, and off-ramps come up.
This notion of that different leadership styles are needed in different types of situations. You think, I always believe that a good team is not necessarily the skills of the team, but their ability to interact. Like, everyone brings just the right attributes to that team. In every situation, sometimes you need a different type of leading than another.
It's absolutely right, Glenn. You need all 4 of those styles. When you think about it, you get a room full of just visionaries. We're going to be chasing squirrels all day long, because we're all going to come up with these brilliant ideas, but nobody's interested in working out, well, how do we make this happen? We get on to the next idea, on to the next idea, on to the next idea. Everybody leaves with a big grin on their face and nothing happens. Whole room full of operators. Well, we're never going to come up with anything that's going to move the needle. We're just going to be talking about, what do we do next? Let's go do it. And the meeting's going to be over like that, because everybody wants to go do something. A whole bunch of processors in the room. Well, we come up with this wonderfully convoluted, highly bureaucratic system that just slows everything down. And if we're all synergists, well, we're just saying, come by, hug a lot, and it's nice, and light a few candles. We need visionaries, operators, processors, synergists in any team to come up with, to balance each other's skill set out and come up with the best optimal solution. So you're absolutely right on that, Brew. Those styles aren't just And by the way, this is not something that I sort of made up. I just put names and stuff that I've recognized over the years. Those styles aren't just individual styles that we can sort of polish. If you want a team to work, you've got to actually work quite hard at making sure the visionary, operator, processors, and synergist styles all get an airing in any substantive discussion.
I think it's important too to like understand each other and each other's strengths and weaknesses as leaders, because I know, like for me, when I think about, oh, I'm butting heads with this person because this is their strength, which is actually my weakness, and I don't understand the need for it. But it's just helped a lot for me to understand that versus constantly butting heads with someone.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Bob.
No, I was just saying, I like that quote where it's, you have to know what you don't know, and I argue that you have to know what you don't know, and you have to know people that know the stuff that you don't know, and that includes like what you're not good at leadership. I'll use the San Antonio Spurs as the greatest example. There's lots of great basketball teams, lots of great sports teams, but the ones that are, the ones that win championships that are, aren't just the flukes, are ones that have multiple leaders. And when someone asks who's a leader, they always say that, well, we have our locker room as our leadership, because different times of the game, different adversity, different things in life make different aspects of leadership step up. And it's just funny because I don't think I became a good leader until I realized what I was really bad at leading at. And then you're like, wow, I'm really bad. I cannot lead people to do this thing, and that really is an eye-opening experience.
Self-awareness is good.
And I think that goes in with failure, because I think it's hard. Until you, and I don't encourage failure, but I think when you fail, you really start to realize as you're picking yourself back up what you're good and what you're not good at. And sometimes, I preach about creating a culture that doesn't encourage failure but supports failure, in the fact that you're not going to get fired if you're trying to be successful and you do something and fail, because that's oftentimes what skews people from not wanting to lead, because too many cultures are saying rewarding the people that keep their head down and don't step up. And if we stop rewarding them and start promoting the people that are willing to take the risk, hey, they weren't successful this time, but you know what, they tried it. And if we reward and promote them, that's I think that's the goal, and that's why I preach on social. If you reward the people that are trying to make a difference, it doesn't mean they had to make a difference, but they're at least putting themselves out there. I think that's the difference between us too often promoting just the status quo people because they're just willing to avoid the risk and failure.
I'm 100% in agreement with that. I have a chapter in the book on failure, for precisely that reason, that there has been a culture grown up in the last number of years. This whole fail off and fail fast approach, that's just nonsense. I mean, that's utter, absolute nonsense. The idea that you were talking about your child, the idea that any of us as parents would stand over our kids and say, hey, go on, fall down. Now get up, fall down again. Fall down again. I want you to keep falling down. Just fall down. It's ridiculous. We want people to succeed, but we also want organizations where if you fail, hey, you failed, now what's the lesson out of that? And let's move on. I mean, let's find out why it happened. Let's stop it happening. You're not going to be punished for it unless you did it willfully. If you show gross incompetence over a prolonged period of time and you're going to refuse to change, then maybe we have to, say goodbye. But we're not either going to stand there and encourage you to frequently fail. We're going to encourage you to frequently succeed, and between us, we're going to work out what the implications of failure are as we get there.
Awesome. Well, we're almost out of time, but I do want to jump to 7 since we briefly touched on 6, but I have a feeling we could talk for an hour about how to overcome failure as a leader. And number 7 is just, what is one of your favorite examples of leadership?
Well, I share 4 case studies, which are real-world case studies, right at the very end of the book. And given it's you, Sherry, I'm going to use one of them that refers to somebody you know about, who's our friend Sarah Robinson, probably known to a lot of people on the call. And you know the story, I'm sure. Some years ago, her little boy Thomas began to rag on her that he wanted a baby boy, but he wanted his mom and dad to adopt. And he just beat up on David and Sarah until they agreed, and they eventually flew out to Russia and adopted their now second son, Nicholas. And what I love about the story is that not only did Thomas take that not so random act of leadership and just beat up on David and Sarah till they did it, but whenever Nicholas came back, he had a genuine care for where his baby brother came from, and he started this project to get shoes for the kids who were left back in the adoption center in Russia because his mom and dad had shared with him that the kids only had one pair of summer shoes, and the winter came, they didn't have anything for their feet. And Thomas has run this thing now for 3 years, and the amounts that he's raising gets more and more each year. He's selling more than just shoes now. And, you know, I love how when Sarah tells the story, she makes it clear that, you know, Thomas, within a few days of Nicholas arriving, told his mom he'd made a huge mistake and wanted the kids sent back. But once he got past that, he saw that there was so much more he could do rather than just, you know, have a baby brother. He was going to help where his baby brother came from. And I just love that story. I mean, I'm not a great one for cutesy kid stories, but I think it pulls a lot, as my son's nodding at me, no, Dad, you're not shooting it. I think it pulls a lot of the principles of Dooley together.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That was a fun story to watch unfold. I remember that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I don't know if you want to just share with everyone real quick where to find you and where to find your book.
Easiest place for the book is to go to doleadbook.com, D-O-L-E-A-D book.com, and you can find me at predictablesuccess.com.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Liz. Great stuff.
Fantastic, and everybody, we'll see you next Friday. We have our special guests from Sprout Social talking about community manager survival. So that's going to be great. Have a great week, everybody. Bye.
Bye.